Welcome all, and thanks for joining the Alaska CASC Seminar series. For the month of April, we're covering topics related to the research integrity that is crucial for responsible research conduct in Alaska context. So today's session, we'll be hearing from Erin Menshouse and Cassie Pinkel from the Office of Research Integrity to learn about all the parts and pieces of research ethics and how to avoid compliance mistakes. We are recording today, so if you need to hop off early, we'll have that available after the fact. And please feel free to use the chat or the hand raising option for questions. I'll hand it over to Cassie to get us started.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm super excited to see some new attendees and some new faces, and hope that we cover some exciting things today. I'm here with my counterpart in the Office of Research Integrity, Erin Menshouse. Erin, wave your hand. We're actually just an office away from each other right now. So Erin's going to kick it off today, but I'm a big proponent of please interrupt us if you have a question, shout it out. That way, if I don't see your hand raised or something, I'm also really bad at monitoring a chat box while talking and listening. So please, if you have a question, kindly interrupt and we will stop to try to answer. So Erin, kick it off.
All right, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, everyone. As Cassie said, I'm Erin. I'm the Export Control Officer, for those of you who haven't met me yet. And today I'm going to be giving you an overview of the export controls side of things, as well as some points on data management. So to begin, so at the end of this, like I said, we're going to give you a broad kind of overview of research ethics and discuss the different relationships between those ethics and university activities. And then basically how to avoid some of the mistakes that we can see being made, as well as where to go for help. So with that, I'm going to start us off with export controls. This is the area I primarily deal with in ORI. And what I'm finding is that there's kind of a mixture of people who have heard of export controls and haven't heard of export controls. But as you can see here on this slide, export controls primarily are regulated by three agencies: the Department of State, the Department of Commerce, and the Department of the Treasury. And each of those agencies have oversight on the technology and the data associated with the technology, depending on kind of what you're researching and who you want to share it with. So with that, what are export controls exactly? So basically, it's a system in place by our federal government to regulate the transfer of goods and technology, services, and software in order to maintain our economic advantage, as well as a security advantage over nations that we've kind of deemed adversarial or may have malicious intent, as well as nations that we don't want to necessarily assist in research endeavors because they have humanitarian or human rights kind of problems or regional stability problems. Most in the history of export controls, it really began after World War II in the development of the atomic bomb. Initially, the laws were drafted to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapon technology. And then, so what that ended up doing is governing a lot of the different research and technology that went into the development of delivery systems, as well as the weapons themselves, and preventing that technology from spreading around the world, right? We don't necessarily want some, foreign governments that might end up using those weapons to actually use them. In modern day, though, and after the Cold War ended, there's still an economic advantage to preventing a lot of this. So what we hear in the news and over the past few years is that some nations are actively campaigning to steal research and intellectual property from universities because they view them as easy targets. So this is where I come in and I help researchers make sure that you can share your information, you can conduct your research and publish as normal, and ensure that we stay within the kind of confines of these regulations if we have to. So with that, it actually causes us to look at a number of university activities to regulate or to have some oversight on. So whenever we travel overseas, on university business. We need to make sure that we know who we're dealing with and where we're going and what we're taking with us, and we'll cover that in a little later. Who are we working with in the country, at the university or elsewhere in the United States? Who is visiting our university from overseas? And what are we sending out of the country? So what actually constitutes an export? So there's three general definitions of what an export is. You have the first one, which is the actual export definition, which is a shipment out of the country. So you're shipping a physical item, you're sending a sample, you're sending code from a controlled software to another country. So the actual physical shipment. Next, we have the deemed export, which, let's say we have a researcher from another country working here at UAF, and we potentially have export control technology they might have access to. The way that these federal agencies look at it is, if you show that control technology to them, it's the same thing as actually physically shipping it to their country. So that's the deemed export definition. And then re-export is passing through multiple nations. So let's say you ship technology, like again, a piece of code to a company or a university in Germany, and then they ship it to another country. That would be an export or a re-export. Okay. This also applies when you're traveling internationally. So the countries you pass through to get to your final destination are considered re-export. Okay. Every time you move from one nation to the next, that would be a re-export. So why is this important to you at all? Most of the things you do for the university, they're not going to have any special controls. They're not going to have any special things that you have to do, but we still have to check. We still have to make sure. So anytime you're shipping anything out of the country, whether it be to Canada, whether it be to the UK or even China, we need to make sure that who you're shipping it to is someone that the government hasn't banned us from doing business with, as well as doing a risk assessment on should we be doing business with them, as well as who you're shipping it to under those same guidelines. Should we be doing business with this person? This also goes, I mean, we're a university, we have a lot of international researchers to come to work with us. So part of that is when they're applying for their visa to work at the university, what I can help you with is that visa application requires that we screen any of our foreign researchers before they come to the university. Again, we need to know where they're coming from, what they're going to be working on, and if we need any licenses before they get here so they can work on the research with you. And again, the collaboration with foreign colleagues, that same process applies to foreign students that might work on your research activities. Also providing services. So if we're going to travel to another country, to another university, and we're going to provide training as part of our research or some other service to that university, we have to review that as well. Because in regards to the ITAR, which is kind of our most restrictive regulation, they want to make sure that no military applicable services are being used in some countries. Next, so ultimately, these controls can seem overwhelming, but what we can end up doing is we just basically have to look at everything when you're bringing in foreign colleagues or you're shipping items or whatnot, and figure out the best way that we can do this. And sometimes the answer might be that we shouldn't do it or we can't do it. Specifically when it comes to countries like North Korea, or it comes to countries like Iran, now Russia and Belarus, most business for those countries, all for North Korea, is going to be next to impossible to conduct or very, very difficult. And we're going to have to follow very, very strict guidelines on how to conduct business. So with that, though, as it says on the left side, when you when we're doing this business, if we are in violation of any of these regulations, non-compliance can have a detrimental effect not only on you as a researcher, but also on the university. What we can, and we'll go over the penalties here in a minute, but the effects of this aren't singular is my point. They compound over time and over multiple different offices and organizations. So violations of this can end up having an impact on everyone, not just you. So I keep mentioning international collaborators and foreign nationals. What is a foreign national according to these regulations? So under the ITAR and the EAR, so the International Traffic in Arms Regulation and the Export Administration Regulations, these are the ones administered by the Department of State and the Department of Commerce. A foreign national is anyone who is not either a U.S. citizen, meaning they were born in this country and they have a birth certificate and U.S. citizenship from birth, a permanent resident, meaning they were naturalized, they have a green card, or they're protected under the U.S. refugee or asylum status. Those are the three categories of persons that are considered U.S. persons. Anyone outside of that is considered a foreign national. And this also applies not only to people, but also to organizations, companies, governments, everything. So you can look at, in the United States, let's say a US company, you can also view them as a US person, if that makes sense. So this is all the more important when we're doing our screening and we're doing our due diligence, when we're working with foreign nationals, to make sure that we can conduct business with them. So specifically, what are the major things so we talk about all these different restrictions, right, with export controls and university research. Now, each of the regulations has made specific exceptions that apply to our work at the university that allow you to conduct your research without having to get licenses necessarily, or for most countries, for personnel from most countries, and not have to basically restrict how you publish data and everything like that. So the first is the most important one, which is called the fundamental research exclusion. This exclusion is going to apply to most of the research at the university. Most of our research here falls under the FRE. So as it says, it's not subject to export controls. No licenses are required to release the information to a foreign national or anything like that. But the important thing is it only covers your research and its results. So if any new technology or new items are developed out of your research, those are going to need to be reviewed because they are not for actual export control restrictions, because they are not covered by this exclusion. So let's say you're working with electronics and you develop a new type of laser. You would need to work with our office. We would have to classify that item with the appropriate agency and then follow the guidelines for how to handle that piece of equipment at the university and how to protect it. The next is the educational information exclusion. What this really means is courses that are taught. If courses are publicly available, offered publicly at the university, there is no export control restrictions on them. So if a student is coming from another country, we don't have to get licenses for them to take normal classes that are offered in our course catalog. There may be some restrictions when it comes to countries that are sanctioned as part of the Department of Treasury. So sometimes there may be licenses that we need to acquire for students coming from places like Iran, or other nations that are sanctioned in that similar manner. Iran is the most common one, and it's possible that currently the sanctions against Russia and Belarus are not restricting any of this, but as the conflict continues, that may actually become the case. It might be, Russia may end up being treated similar to the way that Iran is sanctioned for their nuclear program. And the last one is the public information exclusion. So basically, your research, when you publish it, it is public information. After it is obviously published. Until then, I mean, you're going to you will manage the data and how it is released. But in public information basically means anything that is published without restriction. So sometimes we have in contracts, the government might restrict publication for various reasons. That might be for national security. It might be due to proprietary technology. But as long as there are no restrictions when you're negotiating your grant and contract and everything that goes with it, as long as there's no restrictions, it is going to be considered public information, and it will be excluded from export controls as a result. As I mentioned before, international travel is going to be one of the areas you'll probably most interact with export controls. Now that things with COVID are going better and people are beginning to travel more internationally, what I do is weekly, I will actually log into Concur and I will look at the list of everyone at the university who has applied through Concur for international travel. And what I do is I send out an email to fill out a short questionnaire to ensure that we don't need to apply for any licenses before you travel, and make sure that the groups that you'll be working with while in that country are, groups that we want to be doing business with. So the main questions, as it says, that we want to answer when we're talking about international travel is, where are you traveling? Because again, as it says, countries like Iran, Cuba, Syria, Sudan, and North Korea, they have very, very restricted guidelines and require licenses in order to do business in those countries. In addition to that, the current policy of the university is that university personnel are not allowed to travel to what are considered level 4 countries. So the level system is a State Department system. It's levels 1 through 4. Level 1 is basically a country is considered peaceful. There's not going to be any issues if you travel there. So think of going to Canada, right? A level 4 nation is where there's a significant risk to U.S. persons while they're in country, to various things, human rights abuses, crime, military action, whatnot. So the university is not currently approving any travel to a level 4 country. And you can look up which countries are currently listed under what levels on the State Department website here. Was there a question? Sorry.
It's 8 tracks completed, so I'm assuming that's Janelle Walworth tracks left over. This was in the third one.
I missed your question. You were kind of cutting out. Okay. All right. If there's no question, again, the State Department has they have a rating system for each country, and they'll also be able to provide you with information on that country and any current issues you might need to know about. The State Department also has a system in place to register your travel. That's beneficial for many reasons. One, if the State Department knows you're in country and anything does occur, they have a way to contact you, and you have a way to contact them, so that if you need to be taken out of the country, they can help you do that. But it's only effective if they know you're there. Also, who are you meeting? So again, going back to who are we doing business with, who are we interacting with, is important to know. Maybe some risks associated in dealing with them. Some countries, again, if we travel to China, a majority of their university system is directly linked to the Chinese government and the Chinese military. So we have to be careful on how we interact with the Chinese universities and how and what information that we provide them. We don't want to endanger ourselves with some of these export control regulations. And then why are you going? Again, a lot of people travel overseas for research. They travel overseas to present at conferences. These are all very good and normal things. But we just need to basically be able to understand why we're going. And then what are you taking with you? And this is usually the thing that's going to impact most people traveling overseas. What most people don't realize is that cell phone in your pocket or that laptop that you want to take with you is controlled by the Export Administration Regulations. There is a code assigned to it designating which countries you have to have a license in order to take it to. So a good example would be, obviously, North Korea. You can't take any electronic devices without a license to North Korea. Why you would travel to North Korea, and I don't know. But also with Iran, you would need a license in order to travel with an electronic device to that country. So what I would need to know is what devices you plan on taking with you. So useful information would be the make and the model number, so that we can look up what restrictions it does have. Also with scientific equipment or any sort of technical data or scientific data that you're taking with you, we want to ensure that if any of it is export controlled, that we don't need any licenses to take it to that country before you go. And then just the general guideline again about where are you going and what are you taking with you. In some nations, when you connect to the internet, if you're not using things like a VPN, there is a lot of instances of those host nations potentially spying on what you're doing on your system if you're not connected through a secure connection. So that's something that I would also help make you aware of if you're going to that country. But basically the bottom line when you're traveling is only take what you absolutely need to travel. So if you don't really need your cell phone, personal cell phone, or business cell phone, or business computer or personal computer, you don't need to take it. It's better to leave it at home. And lastly, so we talk about all these different regulations and these controls that we potentially are subject to. In the event that you're doing research that is subject to one of these regulations, it's paramount that we comply with the restrictions that are put in place on us. Because as I said before, the penalties for violating these regulations compound. So, and what they mean in that context is that, so when, let's say we have a researcher that is working from you, they're from they're from a country like China that may be restricted, all right? They're not supposed to see the technology that you're working on, or they're not supposed to have access to certain parts of it. And they do regularly work with it, they do see it. It is not a singular event. They don't view that as a singular event. They will tally up how many times that person had access to the technology or to the data, and each of those are a single offense. So if they had access to it 10 times, those are 10 different offenses, and they all come with the same penalty. So we end up where if it was just an accident, we could end up with civil fines. So we can end up with that compounded 10 times. So if it was a piece of military technology, the researcher and or the university could be fined 10 times that amount. So it's very important that we comply with these regulations. In addition to that, you as a researcher can lose your ability to get federal funding, as well as the university could lose access to federal funding in the future for violating these regulations. So if there's ever any questions about the restrictions that, or piece of technology or data that you have or who you're working with, never hesitate to contact our office and we can help you navigate through these regulations, because they are very large and they can be very confusing very quickly. With that, are there any questions so far? Okay. If there are no further questions, we're going to move on to data management. So as you can see, I mean, data management is kind of a never-ending cycle, right? And the way that the research integrity looks at it is that they're integral to all the core areas of research, and everyone involved in a research-related activity should be aware of how to manage data. And when we're practicing good data management, we will be looking at these areas of selection, collection, analysis, handling, reporting and publishing, and ownership. So first, we're going to discuss selection. So it's this is the process of determining our appropriate data type and source, and also the type of instruments we're going to use to collect the data. So some of the questions that we need to some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves when we're selecting our data is what are the research questions that we're trying to answer? What's the scope of the investigation? What is previous literature in this particular area said is the most appropriate data to collect? And then maybe what kind of data type should be considered to collect? Is it qualitative? Is it quantitative? Should be a combination of both. And then the next piece being, how are we going to collect the most representative sample during the course of our data for our selection? Because we want to incorporate an element of randomness and eliminate any potential bias in our samples that we collect. So using different sampling methods or different kinds of procedures to collect or to select our data is important. And then again, using the proper instrument to collect that data. We want something that is reliable and has been validated to be used in this data collection. As far as data collection is next in the process, so we're gathering and measuring information on our variables of interest, the data that we've selected to collect. What we want to do is avoid some of these common consequences from improperly collecting the data. So what we want to implement is to avoid these issues is a system of quality assurance, which helps us support data integrity while we collect it, and then quality control. So think of quality assurance as your prevention, right? You want to prevent any of the integrity of your data from being compromised, and you don't want to leave any uncertainty about the timing or the methods. You don't want any vague descriptions of the data being collected. Basically, you want to create a system where other people who maybe review your data can come to the same conclusions. And then quality control, think of this as more of our documentation, right? We're taking the time to document the steps we're using as we collect our data, again, for so that we can essentially show our work. All right, and then next would be the analysis. So we're applying statistical or logical techniques to describe or evaluate our data, right? So some of the considerations here, we want to make sure, we have the skills necessary to do so. We're not drawing any sort of unbiased inferences, and we're following the acceptable norms for our discipline, and so on and so forth here. Next is handling. So this is probably one of the more important parts. This is where it comes to how we store our data, how it's archived, how it's disposed of at the end of our research. There are a lot of issues that can come about as a result of this. It depends on the kind of data that you're working with. There are a lot of different guidelines depending on where it comes from, if it's human, if it's animal, if it's export controlled, if it's classified. Any of those kinds of data that you collect have all a range of different considerations when it comes to how you keep it, how you and how you dispose of it. Next would be reporting and publishing. I kind of briefly touched on this already with the export controls. So you're going to have reporting and publishing requirements for, from your funding agencies. There are things that maybe go in there contractually that we want to pay attention to. Of course, any restrictions on publication. But there are also other factors that may maybe pressure you to either withhold publication or publish data that is not necessarily, or it misrepresents what you're doing. This also brings in the area of plagiarism in research and the issues of misconduct that go along with that. Lastly is ownership. So there are a lot of considerations for ownership. The actual paradigm of ownership means who all actually owns the data at the end of the project. So you have to think of this of the party that creates or generates the data, the party that consumes the data, the party that selects and compiles the information, and the funding agency that commissions the data creation can sometimes create ownership issues. And so on and so forth. The other is data hoarding. Okay, this goes back more to restricting publication again. So if you have proprietary information, it's kind of the idea of you're not sharing your science, the science that you're doing with the world. You're kind of keeping it behind lock and key. You also have to look at data ownership policies. So university policies, your own institute's policies, so on and so forth. Any agreements you have with collaborators about who owns the data. And then you need to balance those obligations. And then again, your use of technology. Sometimes the use of certain technologies creates data ownership issues, especially if it is regulated by any sort of export controls or non-disclosure agreements or whatnot. So I went through data management a little quickly. I wanted to give some time back to Cassie because we only have 30 minutes left. So with that, does anyone have any questions? All right, no questions. Well, I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or interrupt us at any point.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay, now if you could turn your speaker down in your office so I don't hear all of my feedback. Okay, you don't have to turn it off, just turn it down. So I just want to touch base real quick on data ownership too. On this slide, when you look at the data ownership and policies, be it as a undergraduate student, graduate student, postdoc, especially graduate student or postdoc, and or a mentor or a mentee situation, please give serious consideration to data ownership and creating some type of policy or an MOU, memorandum of understanding, between you and the PI that you're working for, or if you're the PI, between you and the students, student researchers that you have working with you, under you, for you, in regards to protecting yourself and them as you continue on in your research careers. You would hate to work for someone and really have some ideas sparked and continue on to do some form of type of research and then have that research be claimed by, or have ownership, have someone else have some type of ownership because their thought initiated it. They could somehow link your desire of this type of research to their initial research. So it's just really good to have that policy outlined, laid out in front of you. It protects both of you. So just consider that when you look at data ownership policies. Okay, I'm going to focus on just some general research misconduct. So kind of here you see this little funny cartoons. I tried to throw things in to spice it up a little bit because we've done a lot of lecturing at you, but we're going to do research misconduct. So if you didn't catch it here, our cute little cartoon, the guy's kind of like flicking some results, some data, some specimens away. So, all right, so we're going to go and we're going to talk about federal, go ahead, Erin, federal research. Are the data management slides available for us to use? Let me see what, from Shannon. Management slides available for us to use. They're a comprehensive list of things to think about. I'm sure we could share them. Federal research misconduct, if we're focusing on that specifically, federal research defines 3 types of misconduct: fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. Those are in proposing, performing, and reviewing research, or in reporting research results. So those are the federal research misconduct. So fabrication, right there in front of you, is making up data or results and recording or reporting them. Falsification is manipulating research materials, hence the cartoon we just saw, equipment or processes, or changing or omitting data results such that the research is not accurately represented in the research record. And plagiarism is the appropriation of another person's ideas, processes, results, or words without giving it appropriate credit. And do remember that even major manipulations of someone's words are still those person's words. What is not, research misconduct does not include difference of opinion. So just because you might disagree with the outcome doesn't mean it's research misconduct. Now, if you could prove that the outcome came from fabrication, falsification, or there was plagiarism, that could be research misconduct, but a difference in opinion is not research misconduct. Okay, next one. Other types of misconduct to consider that you want to avoid, to be aware of: misuse of funds. As you're applying for or working under grants or pots of money, they often denote, just as Erin touched on, things that you have to take into consideration: how long you have to keep data, levels of protection, types of information, who owns it, the end user owner. Those are all things. So misuse of funds, using grant monies to pay for things that money was not actually noted for, conducting different research, using a pot of money for one research to finish research for another. All those things are misuse of funds. Improper management of data, Erin really just touched on that in depth. I really appreciate that. Collecting it wrong, not using it right, interpreting it, getting rid of certain parts of it so that you get the results that you want. Not sharing it too widely too soon. It all can be interpreted and looked at differently, but improper management of data. Irresponsible mentoring. If you're taking on a mentor role, you are accepting kind of the liability and signing off to foster and develop that researcher. Overworking them, having them do things that they are not appropriately trained or certified to do, asking them to do things that are or tied to misconduct, but using like a mentor-mentee relationship, peer pressure, coercion. Those are all things. Not respecting others' intellectual property, not reporting an adverse event or research misconduct. If you see something, say something, is this how the saying goes. Not reporting potential conflicts of interest. If you're not sure if you have a conflict of interest, ask your Office of Research Integrity, ask Office of Grants and Contracts Administration. Just ask. Better to ask and sign the right paperwork or get clarification than to have it come out in the end that you needed to report something and you didn't. Not respecting participants, humans, or animals is a huge type of misconduct too. When you submit your protocol and your procedures, you're held to those, and without amendments or modifications, your research is outlined by that protocol, and a deviation is a violation without approval. Okay, next one. So I threw in this little cartoon. It says at the bottom, you are completely free to carry out whatever research you want, so long as you come to these conclusions. So I chuckled, because we know that's misconduct right there. That would be a bad mentor-mentee relationship. Okay, go. Okay, so one thing that I think we all really struggle with that we don't really focus or pay a lot of attention on would be responsible authorship. It's something that all researchers starting in their undergraduate and to graduate career are starting to work on is getting published, doing good research to get published, to get out there in the world, to build a name for themselves, to build credibility. So I'm going to touch base on a few things in regarding to responsible authorship today. We're going to go through just some case scenarios, and I'm going to ask you guys for your insight on like what you think the right answer is. So if you guys want to shout it out or type it in the chat box, but we're going to cover some common mistakes that can come up. Level of contribution, references cited, and self-plagiarism are just three that I grabbed today. So we're going to go to the first one, level of contribution. Level of contribution. This is defined as reciprocity between two colleagues in a research setting that can involve sharing or exchanging resources, data, or information. Reciprocity can also extend to the act of inviting others to participate in a research endeavor. Okay, so that's cool. We do that a lot. We encourage that, especially at the university, amongst our colleges, amongst our units. So let's look at the scenario. Okay, so I'm going to read it, but you can also read it too. Dr. Clemson is preparing to submit a proposal that would extend his current research into a new area of inquiry with which he has limited experience. Dr. Clemson asked a former colleague, Dr. Wainwright, who has written extensively in this area, to participate in preparing the proposal. Dr. Wainwright wavers over the participation because of her impending retirement. However, even though Dr. Wainwright's contribution would likely be little to none, Dr. Clemson would still like to have Dr. Wainwright's name on the proposal because of 1, Dr. Wainwright's name recognition in the field, 2, the likelihood of strengthening the proposal, and 3, increasing the prospects of approval and funding. Ultimately, Dr. Clemson hopes to include Dr. Wainwright's name on all future manuscript submissions. All right, so our question we're going to ask is, what mistakes does Dr. Clemson make? Is it a failure to keep confidentiality when asking Dr. Wainwright to participate, offering a gift authorship, seeking prestige authorship, or practicing ghost authorship? Does anybody have an idea of what mistake happened in that scenario? Shout it out if you can, or type it in the box. I should have numbered them or lettered them. Sorry, next time. Nobody, nothing? Nobody has any idea? Yes, Sarah. Oh, well, close. Okay, Sarah says gift authorship. Elena says prestige authorship. Good job, Elena. You're correct. So click on to the next one. The appropriate answer is they were seeking prestige authorship. So according to a research study that was done, I cannot say that name, I'm going to try. Prestige authorship occurs when a person with a high degree of prestige or notoriety is listed with an author in order to give the publication more visibility or impact. In this case, Dr. Clemens understands that Dr. Wainwright's contribution would be minimal, but feels the proposal chances of approval and funding would be enhanced, as well as all future study-related publications because of her name being on it. Good job. All right, next one. Okay, so a little cartoon here. More funding, more fame, more glory. As you can see, the guys are running over a researcher, and they're being enticed to run and keep running for tenure and publications. So I think this really speaks volumes of what we have to be careful with in the research world in regards to research misconduct. All right. The next scenario is about references cited. So I apologize right now if this is really tiny on your screen, but you're going to want to pay attention to that list of 7 references at the bottom, because that's where the information they're asking you comes from. So the author of the manuscript submitted in June of 2004 proposed, so hear this, June 2004, proposed to test a predictive model of physical activity in middle-aged adults with type 2 diabetes. Physical activity can be an important addition to a regime that seeks to control this condition. While the authors cite previous findings that establish the predominance of at least 3 factors, they are quite critical of the methodologies and analytical procedures used. The references cited include seminal work in this area conducted in the early 1990s. A review of the findings led the current authors to propose modification in the data collection instruments previously used. In addition, a more sophisticated analytical procedure was applied than previously used. Review the cited references below. So we've got Fitzpatrick in 1999, Diabetes Nursing Scientific Review, Connors, 1990 Nurse Collaboration, Grejada, sorry again, Type 2 Diabetes 1987, Cooper 1989, Establishing Changes in Type 2 Diabetes, Merton 1979, The Sociology of Science, Taylor 1991, Physical Activities in Type 2 Diabetes, and Smith 1995, Establishing Nursing Research Collaboration. All right, Aaron, click. So the question here is, what is this distinguishing pattern of the cited references? Is it the list of authors is improperly formatted? None of the cited references are more current than 2000. The date of publications are omitted, and the cited publication represent different research disciplines. Does anybody have an idea if it's, we'll call it 1, 2, 3, or 4? We can click back and look if you want. Okay, Chris says B. None of the cited references is more current than 2000. Anybody else have an answer? B being 2. Good job, Chris, with the association. All right, well, Chris is right. It is, go ahead, Aaron, click on. None of the cited references is more current than 2000. The author proposed an innovative methodology to determine predictors of physical activity in the middle-aged adults with type 2 diabetes. While this area of investigation is replete with published research studies, especially since the year 2000, none of the references cited was more current than 1999. A potential review is left to summarize the reason for this omission. One possibility is that more recent findings would call into question the rationale for both the chosen methodology and the subsequent interpretation of results. The reviewer is likely to ask that the author justify this omission as well as update the literature review. I included this question because one thing I actually get a lot in IRB review, and they're also required in IACUC reviews, is a literature review. We ask for at least 5 current references from within the last 3 months for IACUC, and I do believe it's 6 months for IRB. And a lot of times people will throw in references, but they don't do a summarization, they don't list a date of search, and they don't do their database of search, which are all required. So a lot of times I have to go back and ask for that information. So I threw this one in to show you the importance and why it helps you ensure that you're doing good research and collecting good data, and why it's important in the review process. Okay, next one. All right, this one made me laugh because the prisoner's saying, I'm in for Grand Theft Auto, you, and the guy says plagiarism. Okay, next. We're going to talk about self-plagiarism. Plagiarism is the intentional taking of another person's work and claiming it as one's own. This practice has been observed not only among students in every level, but also among academics, administrators, and professional researchers publishing in peer-reviewed journals. According to this reference, the practice of plagiarism is a form of academic high treason because it undermines the entire scholarly enterprise. The question raised is whether a researcher can plagiarize from their own body of work. So let's see, here's the scenario. A researcher has authored 2 publications in the area of behavioral research. One, a peer-reviewed article, a second as a chapter from an edited book. The specific area involves patient compliance to treatment of pulmonary tuberculosis. The new article he is preparing for submission is related to the 2 previous publications. In a discussion of health-related skills, the researcher pulls a paragraph from the book chapter word for word. Here's the paragraph they pull below. The researcher feels that since he authored the published material, citing the work is unnecessary. So you can see here, he just inserted a paragraph and quote. So let's see, what's the question, Aaron? Has the researcher made an error in judgment? No. the author of the previous material, as the author of the previous material, he is not obligated to cite his published work, or yes, despite being the author of the material, he is obligated to cite his published work, whether the material is paraphrased or taken whole. So no or yes. What do you guys think? Ooh, Shannon says yes. Anybody else? Sarah said yes. Anybody else? Mike says yes. All right, Chris says yep, like it. Okay, let's click on. You guys are all right, kudos. Yes, despite being the author of the material, he is absolutely obliged to cite his published work, whether the material is paraphrased or taken whole. The researcher is obliged to cite his published work, whether paraphrased or taken whole. Self-plagiarism is defined as reusing one's own work that has been submitted previously as an assessed item for another publication. Self-plagiarism is more than recycling one's work. It can be perceived as an attempt to deceive editors, reviewers, and readers. This happens when no indication is given that the work is being recycled, or when an effort is made to disguise the original text. While someone may argue that this is not possible to steal from one's own work, others feel only original written material does not have to be cited. So good job, guys. That was awesome on that one. So that basically says you can't write something, publish to one journal, copy it, rechange the title, and publish to another journal. We don't do that. Okay, what's next? I think I have a cartoon to end. Here, Calvin's saying, I think we got enough information now, don't you? And Hobbs is, all we have is one fact you made up. And Kelvin says, that's plenty. By the time we add an introduction, a few illustrations, and a conclusion, it'll look like a graduate thesis. So I thought that one was really funny too. Okay, I think next is just questions. Okay, back to you guys. If you guys have any questions for Aaron and I, we'll try our best to answer. And if we can't answer, we'll try our best to get you an answer as soon as we can. These are things that we take seriously at the university. I know you guys often get bogged down by the training requirements that we put you through for CITI and RCR training and export controls training and all the other types of trainings that we have, but they're all there for a reason, to protect you, to protect the researchers, to protect the university, to protect your funding agencies. So, any questions?
I'd also like to add on that, you know, we have to do this training a lot because these regulations and these rules, they change all the time. There's always additions to the rules. There might be fundamental changes to how they work and how they affect the university. So conducting this training is a good way to help you understand those changes.
Shannon, excellent. Thanks, Aaron. Excellent question. So Shannon asked, Shannon states data management is increasingly required by grantors. That is so true. Does UAF have an acceptable in-house site that you can encourage faculty to use? I do think we have a data management section on our website. It is definitely not up to date. I do know that we are currently working on new university-wide policies for data management. UAF is working with UA. Aaron is actively working with Sean to do new data management policies. So currently we don't have any to offer you yet, but you will be seeing that come out of the pipeline in the near future.
Yeah, Sean is, he's been on board for about a year now. He's the university system cybersecurity officer, and he is currently reviewing all of the system policies on data management and refining those to get us in line with federal regulation and requirements. And there's actually going to be some changes to our entire university network coming over the next 2 years to help bring us in line with all of that and help you make things easier for all of you.
Hi, Margaret. I see you post something about the DMP tool, the Arctic Data Center, Data One. I'm not familiar with that. So as far as I know, we don't have plans. Aaron, do you know?
I'm not familiar, but I'll look into it more.
So thanks for the resource, Margaret. I think the one thing to note too, when we talk about research misconduct, it can be really intimidating, but just remember that we do have a process at the university that is laid out. So if you see something, say something. When you report it, whomever you're reporting it to, the Office of Research Integrity, the institutional official, whoever you feel best to report it to, there is a process outlined. So it's not just automatically like someone says something and you're going to get reported for a research misconduct. We have an entire investigation process that's undergone to come to the consensus at the end that it may or may not be research misconduct. If so, what it is and what remedial things may need to happen because of it. So don't automatically assume that it is research misconduct. We do have a process in place here at the university for distinguishing that. But see something, say something. That's the most important. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I just want to thank you all. There's so many of you today. It's so nice to see some people. This was our 4th in the series for the month of April on research misconduct, IRB, IACUC, IVC, all things Office of Research Integrity, export controls, data management, conducting research in rural communities with our Indigenous peoples. And I know that they've recorded all of our videos. I don't know where they're available for you, but they must be somewhere. Molly can tell you. So we just thank you for reaching out and trying to educate everyone and being here today.
Thanks so much, Cassie and Aaron, for joining us. That was a great presentation, lots of great info. We do have all the recordings at this point. I can share the links directly, but we will be finding them a place on the CASC website somewhat soon. So you can get in touch or just wait for that announcement to go out. But thanks everyone for joining. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you all again.
And happy Friday. Enjoy the sunshine.
Thanks so much.
Again.